Welcome to Jan-Piet's Choice. And this should be, I hope, a very educational and also strange and odd and funny one, maybe. I'm going to play a piece that is, dare I say, quintessential in the repertoire of piano students. Not so much of concert pianists, I don't think at all. But piano students, if you're trained traditionally, or as the editor of that book over there says, if you're trained decently or properly, then you know this piece of music inside out. And probably, even if you don't like it, you've probably played it so many times on the piano that your fingers will go there automatically if I play it, or even if you would hear it on a recording. And then I'll tell you a little bit more about the history of that piece after it was written. First, well, various things that various people did with that piece at various points in time, of course. And once again, this little thing today links with lectures or presentations I've done here the last 4 or so weeks. It all has a bit to do with it. And I'll tell you how I come up with this topic today. Just in case you wonder, where does he get all these stupid ideas from every week? Many ideas, as you well know, come out of work with students. Of course, not in a university, but privately here in town. And these students work on repertoire for certain things. And one way that I use Jan-Piet's Choice, have been using almost from the beginning, is to give students opportunity to perform and try out a certain piece of music they're working on. For example, clarinetists or violinists or singers. And this has been a lot of fun. This today comes out of something completely different, but also professional, if you like, activity. A publisher in Germany is making, for the first time ever, a complete edition, well, a complete edition of all the organ works of a certain composer. And I accumulated 2 volumes of that very expensive edition for free, on the sort of condition that I would write a review about both volumes, or combined, or 1 or 2 or something. And it's all very good and very scholarly, and but I have been putting off writing those reviews a little bit, but now that has sort of happened, or I'm sort of in the process of doing that. And then, as part of looking at these new editions, which are very handsome and very nice, I'll tell you later what it is, and very special in their own way, I looked at the music of that composer that I already, of course, owned, partly to compare this new edition with existing editions, and partly to sort of get my mind going a little bit, if that's possible. And then I realized that I had this lovely little book, which I had not done very much with, but a little bit with. And I thought, gee, that is so interesting. And in fact, then I thought maybe I can do something with one of those pieces in that book for Jan-Piet's Choice this week. So that's where it came from this week. Now, first, that original piece. And to make it even more original, I do what our violinist here did last week and the week before, I think. I'm playing from the composer's original manuscript, which I purchased at the cost of something like $5 million, but not really. Of course, I have an edition that has copies of the composer's own handwriting, you see, but you cannot see from this distance which composer it is. But you probably guess it anyway. Where's so many people today? So, apart from my mistakes, that's that piece that this composer wrote, and that he first, it's not this manuscript, but this composer first, in fact, we think, wrote it into a little book of keyboard music that he put together for his oldest son. Not only, presumably, to learn how to play, but also, presumably, to learn how to write, and maybe even how to play, how to write instantly. Improvise. So the composer, of course, is Bach, and his oldest son, of course, was Friedemann. Yes, exactly right. And then a little bit later, Bach said, let's look at these pieces again, and put them together in a nice collection. It has become fashionable among scholars to refer to this collection, this book by Bach, with its, as it were, proper title, the Aufrichtige Anleitung. The problem with that is it's very difficult to translate into English. It means something like upright instruction. Honest, proper instruction, thorough instruction, I don't know. But Aufrichtige Anleitung, that book contains, besides this piece, 14 like it, and then another 15 the same way, but a bit more complex, right? Does anybody know?
No, what?
Well, let's talk about it first. How many voices in this little piece? That's nice for beginning keyboard players because
you don't get.
Well, yeah, most people have two hands, and so you can play one voice in each hand. And Bach is teaching you with these pieces how to play something different, but of course related, in each hand. Right? So it's clearly designed that way. The right hand plays something, and the left hand says, well, I can do that too. And in fact, one way of looking at psychology of learning is, even in that very, very beginning, in a way you could say the left hand is quickly learning something from the right. Right? And actually this is, I'm not kidding, this is serious. If the left hand can do something, when the left hand can do something, the right hand can then learn it more quickly. Right? The one hand learns from the other. That's very well documented, and you see that all the time if you teach keyboard instruments. So Bach wrote not one piece like that, two voices in two hands, but 15 in a row. That was a little bit mean because, but basically he composed different pieces in different keys, right? But it was a bit mean because there are many more keys to compose it. But he chose only 15, all right, for this project. But what he then did is he composed another 15 similar pieces, but a bit more complex. In fact, much more complex. Because what did he do?
Add another voice?
He added a third voice that you were supposed to play now.
With both?
Yes, I was going to say with your nose. No! He adds a third voice in the middle, and you're supposed to play these three voices with the two hands. That means one voice, in essence, will be in the right, the other one, in essence, in the left, and the one in the middle will have to be divided. And that is not just a little bit more difficult, but much more difficult. In fact, I think that Bach made a little bit of a pedagogical error here. He probably thought, I'm going to make it a little bit more difficult, but he made it a lot more difficult. Everybody who has played those 15, what are they called, the 2 parts? Inventions, and who has moved on to the 3-part, well, the 3-part inventions, but really they're called sinfonias. Everybody who has tried to make that step says, it is much more difficult. You cannot really do that. You cannot really do the 52 parts and then move on to the 3rd part. It's a real problem. Maybe with lots of help, but it's very difficult. Anyway, so here we have it, that first piece for 2 hands. And the first piece of the collection obviously had to be in which key, do you think?
C.
Yes. The piece starts with the C, and it's in the key of C major. The C, in many ways, is the first note for composers and for musicians by the time that Bach comes along, right? So here it is. He starts with the C, and that's the beginning of a whole book of wonderful keyboard music, but also that teaches you really how to play well and how to do it yourself, how to write such pieces yourself. The aufrichtige Anleitung, the upright instruction. Right? Okay, so there we have it. Now, much later, Bach, much older, maybe even a bit blind, he's looking at these pieces again, and he plays the piece again, maybe in his mind, or maybe even on the piano, harpsichord, keyboard instrument. And he says, yeah, but it's a little bit boring. And you know what he does? He takes his pen and he starts messing up his own little composition by putting notes everywhere. And here's the piece, how it actually appears in the manuscript. With the extra notes. Most editions don't have these extra notes, but they are there. The piece is very rarely played in that version. And I'm not quite sure why that is, to be very honest. Editions usually don't print those extra notes. And it's odd because they are clearly Bach's. And yet we somehow tend to look at them as not really part of the piece. Which one do you like better? With the extra notes or without? Without, because you're used to it, right?
Yeah.
The second time through, I like the second one better because you could hear you could more hear the first one, and I could hear the first one underneath still.
You like this better?
Now I do.
interesting, right? So now, one way of looking at that, I suppose, is Bach adding on to himself. He takes the piece and he says, well, make it a little bit, I can add more notes still. It's still a little bit too empty. Right? Leave that for a moment. Now, here, in a moment, I'm going to play yet another version of the piece by a different composer. And the background of this arrangement, of this transcription, is that it's pedagogical in the first place. This composer and his friend were both very, very much interested in organ playing and in organ teaching. Says the friend to the composer, isn't it terrible how people neglect playing with two separate hands and feet these days? Well, says the composer, I suppose so. Well, says the pedagogue, the friend, it really is a problem and we should do something about it. How about you and I together, we write a school of what we call trio playing on organ. Right hand, left hand, separate parts, like these pieces. And another separate part with your feet. There was nothing new at that stage about writing such pieces for organ. Bach himself had done that. But at this stage, these two people, the composer and his pedagogue friend, thought there needed to be more and better study material to develop that sort of technique. And guess what they did? Well, I play it for you first. Could also see if you recognize this piece. But I just barely, right? So what did these two funny German guys the composer and his organ teacher friend do with the piece? They harmonized it.
Slowing it down a little.
I played it a bit slower because it's really tricky.
Oh.
And also because I believe the composer and his organist friend heard the piece a little bit slower, at least in that version. You're right, of course, but a different way of saying it.
Yeah, it's in the beginning we right hand and the left hand play the top hand, but the left hand is harmonizing it with terrible playing.
Yes, exactly right. Yes.
They kept changing.
The composer and his pedagogue friend decided to take these 15 inventions by Bach, the first half of our Aufrichtige Anleitung, the two-part pieces, and this was for a reason. They said, let's take these pieces because every beginning organist or even intermediate level organist knows these pieces backwards. Because assuming that is, they say that that the organist has had proper piano teaching before. Then he or she will know these pieces inside out. So now we're going to take these same keyboard pieces by Bach and take them to the organ and make it a little bit more difficult. Just like Bach had made the pieces a little bit more difficult, well, writing new pieces, by adding a voice to be divided about the two hands, between the two hands. Now, the composer and his pedagogue friend took the pieces and added the third part to be played by the left hand. The right hand, easy, plays the same notes, sort of, as Bach's. The pedal, well, not exactly easy, but somewhat easy, plays the same notes as Bach's left hand. The left hand, very difficult for various reasons. Not only is that the extra new part, but also the left hand is doing something new. Instead of playing the bass part that it had learned to do on the piano, well, it now has to look how the feet have to play that bass part. And it, the left hand, has to do something new. Very tricky, very difficult. And I think if you can play these pieces really well, then it seems to me you can play the organ really well. And so that's what this composer and his pedagogue friend did. I'm pretty certain the composer wrote the notes, and maybe also all the other indications. There's a number of funny things I'll tell you in a moment. And I think the pedagogue friend wrote in all the fingerings and pedalings. Almost for every note, he tells you exactly which finger or which foot to use in which way. Mildly obsessive, but if you want to learn it, there's something really cool here. So there we are. Any guesses about who this composer might be? I'll give you one hint. The composer's name has been mentioned here before in connection with music by Bach.
Reger?
Yes. Reger, who was an organist himself and wrote more for organ and very good stuff than almost any composer at that time, which is why for organists Reger is a much more important composer than for, say, violinists or pianists. We don't have so much music organists from that time period of that sort of high quality. So we play Reger more than, say, pianists or violinists usually. And the friend, the organ pedagogue, was a very fine organist, Karl Staube, who became Reger's favorite organist. Not only because Straube could play really well, but also because he volunteered to premiere many of Reger's organ pieces. He just took like 3-4 weeks off in a vacation and learned another big organ piece by Reger. Every year or so he did that. So he was Reger's favorite organist for good reasons. Both very fine musicians. And it seems very logical in a way that they collaborated on such a project. And that they took Bach's inventions and messed around with them. Oh, I suppose you can look at that in many ways. You can say, well, that's really naughty. These pieces were meant for 2 hands. And not for 3. And Reger is maybe a very nice composer, but not a Bach. How does he dare to touch Bach's music? And I think that's a very valid point of view. Another way of looking at it is to say, well, they took these famous pieces and they now, and they treated them a little bit more difficultly, yes, not quite fair, but can you learn to play the pedals on the organ by using such pieces? Absolutely yes. Could they have done that without adding a 3rd hand, a left hand? Yeah, I suppose. But was it a nice idea? Well, in some ways I think it is. I am not sure if any organ teacher around the world does use these pieces to teach organists. I think it's gone out of fashion that way a long time ago, probably. But in some ways, I think it's a bit of a shame, because it's very nice music, the 2 voices by Bach, and the 3rd voice is also very good. It's clearly not as nice as Bach's own, but it does, in a strange way, add. And what I find particularly nice is how it gives you an idea, an inkling, of how Bach's music sounded in a way for composers and organists in the early 20th century. Because by listening to the notes that Reger added, you know a little bit more about how he understood this piece of music. And I'm sure how Straube, the organist, understood it. And by extension, how most people in Germany in 1900, 1903 heard this piece. And that I find fascinating. I'll play a few more bits and pieces from it, and I'll tell you some funny things. The first thing is this. Here are little ornaments. There's one here, and there's one there. If I had not read Reger's footnote, I would have played those ornaments very differently. In fact, I think the ornament in the right hand is in fact wrong. Bach writes this. I think, but there's a long tradition of misreading that ornament for this. So instead of people here, and now Reger says, but if you have that ornament with the note below, then you must do this. So instead of, which would be normal, he says, do this. And he says, all the time that you have a little ornament with the note below, you must do exactly that. So in that first bar, And if that footnote weren't there, I would have had no idea about that aspect of performance practice in the early 20th century. But there it is. And I think by extension, you can assume that if Reger played Bach on the piano, or Strauber, that they always made those ornaments with a lower note that way, very small. And as a result, you get this funny, for musicians, chromatic sort of world. It sounds much more like Reger in a way than it sounds like Bach. But it also sounds like Bach. And that I find so fascinating. You get very funny chords. For example, here. The next one up. It's just a little bit sort of pushy in a very beautiful, I think, very Regnerian way. I'll try it again. Left hand had maybe a little ornament, because now that has to come in the feet. That's tricky. And Strauber tells you exactly what to do. And once again, he tells you exactly which note to play. That funny chromatic note instead of the diatonic one. Very, very much Reger and not Bach at all. But nice nonetheless. Funny extra voice. Where are we here? It's because there's a G sharp there and a G natural there, almost at the same time. Sometimes it's a little bit awkward in his writing, but in its own way that's very charming. For example, this one. And that note should go up, right? signature, I think it's there. Here's that left hand. Could Bach have written that? Yeah, but not here. So much fuller and a bit more serious because of that extra note, right? Bach wrote these three. And Reagan said, there's one note missing in the chord, right? Which note is missing? The fifth chord. And richer also. More, I think, rager. So that's it. What do you think? Is that piece now rager, or is it still Bach?
Has to be both.
It's both, right? It's really both. If you play them in a concert, you would, I suppose, would have to write Bach Rager or Rager Bach. It's difficult to know what to do with this sort of music beyond Jan-Piet's choice or beyond playing for yourself. But in some ways, I think it's very worthwhile, and partly because so many people know these inventions really well, and you hear them now in a different way. And in a way that's, I think, a lot of fun. Shall I play one more time?
On what?
Yeah, good question. Well, which one do you prefer? The two-hand original one, the one with the extra notes, or the Rager one with the extra voice? Difficult question. I played one time the organ with Rager's extra part, and I tried as much as you can see them to, and manage to do it, to play exactly Strauss fingering and pedaling. But don't shoot me if I make one mistake.
Yes, question please. Just look, some clarification please. Throughout your presentation, you were saying that the right hand, once it learns something, then the left hand can learn and follow once the right hand is there. Is that applicable to left-hand dominant people?
That's my question too.
Yeah.
I don't know. I suppose it would, but maybe the other way around.
Yeah, that's what I was asking.
Yes, I'm sure it would. Do you have an experience? Yeah, because you're left-handed, right? Yes.
And so am I.
Oh, okay. I didn't,
Yes, you
gosh, I have so many left-handed students these days. It's remarkable. No, it's really interesting. But yes, I'm not. Are you aware of that?
No, no.
Oh, but you are. You said. Yeah. How about you? If you have learned something with one hand, the other hand will more easily pick it up.
So rather than saying the right hand, it may be the dominant hand.
Yeah. Presumably the dominant hand.
Yeah.
But I'm not even sure that it makes that matters. Like even if you're left dominant, like you're lefty sort of.
No, I'm right.
Oh, okay. But let's say she's lefty. If she had learned something first with right,
Yeah.
I still even then think that the left hand would pick it up quickly.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's both ways, I think. So in a way, I think it's independent from which hand is dominant.
Righto.
Yeah.
There are different sorts of left-handedness. Like anything that's done with two hands, I do the right-handed way. But anything that's done with one hand, I do with the left-handed way. So I think it probably varies from
Yes,
person to
there's
person.
yes, of course, various ways, various levels, and various ways of of dexterity. That's the word.
Yes, ambidextrous.
Ambidexterity. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Good.
Okay.
So that was my choice for this week. Thanks for the question. My choice for this week: Bach's first invention, messed about with, by Max Reger, whose last name was the same as music, same forwards, backwards, and with the help, or maybe initiated by Reger's organist friend Karl Strauber. And before that, I showed you how Bach himself already had messed around with his own piece. So this is a little bit of another little chapter in this potential book about arranging and transcribing Bach himself and other people with Bach.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.